Welcome back. Now we are going to start with our application questions. So the first question that we have here says, how does removing predators from an environment cause an imbalance in the ecosystem? Now, if you remember that we said that we have producers, we have consumers which eat the producers, and then we have the predators which eat the consumers. So now, if we remove the predators, what will then happen? Because if you remember, predators are those animals that catch and kill and eat their prey. So now, if all of those animals were to be taken away in an environment, or from an environment rather, what would then happen? So the first thing that would happen is that we would have a negative effect on the food web. What do we mean by negative effect? Is that there will be an increase in the number of herbivores. Obviously now there's going to be more animals that are feeding on the producers, and nobody is feeding on them. So there will be an overload on animals that eat the producers, which could then lead to overgrazing. So if we are speaking of overgrazing, this is when grass is being exposed to a lot of animals that are eating it at the same time and not giving it enough time to regrow. That is overgrazing. So we end up not having certain producers. So now overgrazing could cause certain producers to be wiped out from the ecosystem. So that is what would happen. So the wiping out of these producers will cause herbivores to die. Obviously, they have no food to eat now, which causes an imbalance in the ecosystem. So that is how important predators are. If they are there, they are helping in ensuring that the ecosystem stays balanced. We do not have more consumers than necessary, because if they are not there, then we'll have more organisms eating grass. Then we'll have no grass, and then these organisms won't have food to eat. That causes an imbalance. I hope that one was clear. Now we are going to move on to our second question, which says, if an impala was hunted and killed by a lion, so the lion is our predator here, what happens to the remains of the impala after the lion and scavengers have fed on it? So this impala was killed by the lion then fed. After that, scavengers came, they also fed, and now there's remains of the impala. What happens to them? Well, sorry about that. So what happens is that we are then going to see decomposers playing their role here. So the decomposers down, yes, and eat the remains. Right, that's the first thing that would happen. Decomposers will break down the remains of the impala and eat them. And then some of the remains will be, sorry about that, absorbed into the soil and used by plants for nutrition. Right, so that is what will happen. So some of the remains that will be leftovers from the decomposers will then be absorbed into the soil, and then plants will use these remains as nutrients in order for them to regrow again. So that is what we mean when we say decomposers recycle the nutrients in the ecosystem. So that is what would happen if an impala was killed and then remains of it were to be left unattended. So if you can see, decomposers have a very big role that they are playing in society, because if they'd be taken away, then the ecosystem would rot and stink, and there'd be just piles of dead animals, and we would not know what to do with them. Right, so we are going to move on to our last question. Right, so our last question says, from the list of organisms provided, complete the following food chain by filling in the correct organisms according to the descriptions in the boxes. So let us look at the boxes. The first box has producer on it, and the second one has primary consumer. Then we have secondary consumer. Then we have tertiary consumer. So now, from the list provided to us, this is the list that has been given to us. I'm just going to show all of them at once. Right, so the first animal that we have there is a snake. We have leaves, we have rabbit, grass, fox, hawk, carrots, lion, frog, and grasshopper. So from this list, you need to be able to identify one organism that's going to fit into the box. So we said producers are organisms that have the ability to make their own food. So that tells us that these are plants. So the first thing that needs to come into the first box should be a plant. Right, so for this example, I am going to pick grass. So that is number one, grass. Right, so now we are building our own food chain here, because you can see from the grass we have an arrow that shows the flow of energy. So the energy from the grass is now going to be moved to what? What is the grass being eaten by? In this instance, I am going to pick the grasshopper. Grasshopper. Right, so the energy from the grass is being transferred to the grasshopper, and then our grasshopper is our primary consumer because it is the first to eat the plants, right? Now, the grasshopper will be eaten by the secondary consumer. So our secondary consumer here, from the list, what can eat the grasshopper? The frog. Let us put the frog here. Right, so we have the frog. So the frog is going to occupy the position of our secondary consumer because it is no longer eating the plant directly. It is eating the grasshopper, which has the energy that comes from the producer. So we have the frog here. And then the frog is eaten by our tertiary consumer. And then the tertiary consumer from the list is blah, blah, blah. Right, let's put the snake there. The snake. So that is our food chain. The grass is being eaten by the grasshopper. The grasshopper is then eaten by the frog. The frog is then eaten by the snake. So that is the interaction using feeding relationships between these organisms. So from here, actually not from here, I am going to leave it here for now, and I'll see you after the ad break.